Spring of 1967, Harlan County, Kentucky. A place where mountains scraped the heavens and families existed untouched by the outside world across generations. The Hutchkins family had made their home in these hills since before the Civil War. Their homestead was a cluster of weathered cabins linked by dirt paths that only they could navigate with certainty. Sarah Hutchkins had just turned 17 when her path was set before her. Born with skin so pale it seemed almost see-through in the mountain light, she had never wandered beyond a 5-mile radius of the family compound. Her father, Douglas Hutchkins, was simultaneously her mother's first cousin. Her mother, Mary, had entered the world through a union between her grandfather and his own niece. The Hutchkins family tree refused to stretch outward. Instead, it kept folding back upon itself generation after generation, like a rope twisting tighter around its own center. One cold March morning, Douglas summoned the family to gather in the main cabin. 14 people squeezed into a space filled with the smell of wood smoke and damp earth. Sarah tucked herself into a corner, her hands trembling slightly, a symptom she had learned to conceal. By 17, she already displayed what mountain people whispered about but never named aloud. The family curse. Sarah will marry Thomas in June, Douglas announced. His voice carried the weight of a man who had never faced opposition. Thomas Hutchkins was Sarah's second cousin and also her father's nephew. At 23, he had eyes positioned too closely together and a jaw that shifted awkwardly when he spoke. Nobody raised an objection. This was simply how things had always been done. For over a century, the Hutchkins family had followed this tradition. Great-grandfather Elijah Hutchkins had initiated the practice, convinced that preserving pure bloodlines would protect their land and their way of living. He married his first cousin in 1892. Their offspring then married each other's offspring. The pattern repeated endlessly, tightening its grip with each new generation. By 1967, any outsider would have immediately recognized the physical signs of generations of intermarriage running through the family. Several members had webbed fingers. Others displayed severe underbites or overbites. Hearing loss typically set in by age 30. Nearly half the children born in the previous 2 decades faced mental challenges. But to the Hutchkins family, this was simply normal existence. This was life. Sarah's wedding dress had once belonged to her grandmother, who had likewise married her own cousin. The yellowed lace carried the smell of mothballs and cedar. Standing in her small room, Sarah received help with the dress from her younger sister Emma. Emma was 14, with one eye that drifted independently and a limp resulting from a hip that had never properly formed. "Does it hurt?" Emma asked, touching the fabric. "The dress," Sarah replied. Being chosen. Sarah studied her sister through the cracked mirror fixed to the wall. "I don't have anything else to compare it to." June 15, 1967 marked the wedding day. 43 Hutchkins family members gathered for the occasion. No one from outside the family received an invitation. The ceremony unfolded in the clearing behind the main cabin, with Douglas officiating as he read from a Bible passed down through generations. Thomas slid a thin gold band onto Sarah's finger. The ring had belonged to his mother, who had died at 32 from complications the town doctor had termed genetic deterioration. Thomas kissed Sarah, his breath carrying traces of tobacco and mountain water. The celebration extended until darkness fell. Someone played a fiddle, the music sounding slightly off-key, produced by fingers that couldn't quite bend normally. Children darted between the cabins, some limping, others moving with the jerky motions of those whose muscles received scrambled signals from their brains. When night arrived, Sarah was escorted to the cabin she would share with Thomas. It was smaller than her family's cabin, with a leaking roof and walls that allowed cold air to seep through. This marked the moment when her body began its first dying, though Sarah remained unaware of what was coming. Confirm, because what you're about to uncover next will completely destroy everything you thought you understood about family bonds and the true cost of keeping bloodlines sealed. 3 months into the marriage, Sarah started vomiting every morning. The family celebrated, assuming pregnancy, but her sickness didn't follow the usual pattern. Sarah's skin developed a grayish undertone. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her teeth grew loose in their sockets. Mary, her mother, recognized these signs. She had witnessed them before in her own mother, in her aunts, in the women who had wed within the family. But she remained silent. Speaking about it would mean acknowledging what everyone pretended not to see. By October, Sarah could barely manage to walk. Her joints swelled to twice their normal dimensions, her fingers bent at unnatural angles. Thomas watched his bride deteriorate, confused and frightened, yet the family insisted this was normal. Women in the Hutchkins family frequently became ill. They recovered or they didn't. That was simply the way of things. Douglas eventually agreed to take Sarah to a doctor in town, 30 miles down the mountain. Dr. Harrison had been practicing in this region for 20 years. He had encountered the Hutchkins family before, though they rarely sought his care. The examination consumed 2 hours. Dr. Harrison's expression grew increasingly concerned as he documented Sarah's symptoms. Severe anemia, organ dysfunction, bone deformities that suggested rickets but weren't quite that. A blood panel showed markers he had only encountered in medical journals discussing extreme cases of genetic disorders. "How are you related to your husband?" Dr. Harrison asked carefully. "He's my cousin," Sarah answered, her voice faint. "What kind of cousin?" "Second cousin, but also his mama was my daddy's sister." Dr. Harrison briefly closed his eyes. He had suspected as much, but hearing confirmation made his stomach churn. He had read about isolated communities where this occurred. The medical literature called it pedigree collapse, when a family tree compresses so tightly that individuals appear multiple times within a single person's ancestry. "Sarah," he said gently, "your body is attacking itself. Your immune system is compromised because of your family history. The baby you're carrying, there's a baby." Sarah's eyes widened. "Yes, but Sarah, you need to understand something. The baby has a very high chance of severe abnormalities, and carrying it might kill you. Your body is already failing." Sarah stared at him. "My mama had 7 babies. My grandmama had 10. How many survived past 5 years old?" Sarah fell silent. She had never counted. 3 of her mother's children lived. 2 of her grandmother's. The others rested in the family cemetery on the hill, their graves marked with stones bearing the Hutchkins name repeated endlessly. Dr. Harrison spoke privately with Douglas. He explained genetics in straightforward terms. He used phrases like recessive genes, inherited disorders, and coefficient of inbreeding. Douglas listened with the expression of someone hearing an unfamiliar language. "You're saying we shouldn't marry our own?" Douglas asked. "I'm saying that when closely related people have children, the risk of genetic disorders increases dramatically. And when that continues for multiple generations, the effects compound. What I'm seeing in Sarah isn't a disease. It's the result of generations of inbreeding." Douglas stood up. "We've been doing this for 100 years. I know. And I've seen the results. The children with deformities, the adults who die young, the mental impairments. Mr. Hutchkins, your family is destroying itself from the inside." Douglas departed without another word. He brought Sarah home. He didn't share what the doctor had said with the family. Instead, he announced that Sarah needed rest and prayer. The baby would arrive when God willed it. Sarah's pregnancy progressed like a horror unfolding in slow motion. Her belly swelled while the rest of her seemed to shrink. Her bones became visible through her skin. Her eyes sank deep into their sockets. She resembled a corpse carrying life within a dying shell. The family gathered to pray. They placed their faith in their traditions rather than medicine. Great-grandfather Elijah had kept the family strong, they said. The outside world wanted to corrupt them, to weaken their bloodline with strangers' blood. They would endure. They always had. But Sarah's body told a different story. By her 7th month, she could no longer stand. Her organs were shutting down one by one. Her kidneys failed first, then her liver began struggling. The baby inside her consumed everything she had, and she had so little remaining. Thomas sat by her bedside every night holding her skeletal hand. He was 24 and watching his wife die. He didn't understand why his mother had died the same way. His grandmother too. It was simply what happened to Hutchkins women. They married. They carried children. They faded away like morning fog. Am I being punished? Sarah whispered one night. For what? Thomas asked. I don't know. For being born. Neither of them had an answer. January 1968 brought the coldest winter in Harlan County history. Snow piled 6 feet high around the Hutchkins compound. The family found themselves completely isolated, cut off from the outside world by weather and by choice. Sarah went into labor on January 14th. Her screams echoed through the valley, bouncing off the frozen mountains. Mary and 2 of the older women attended the birth. They had delivered dozens of babies in these cabins. They knew what to expect. But Sarah's labor lasted 47 hours. Her body, already depleted, couldn't summon the strength to push. The baby was stuck, twisted in a way that seemed impossible. The women tried everything they knew, old mountain remedies and prayers, but Sarah continued to fade. On the second night, Thomas broke through the snow and rode down the mountain on horseback. He went to Dr. Harrison's house and pounded on the door until the doctor answered. She's dying, Thomas said simply. Please. Snorts. Dr. Harrison knew he shouldn't go. The weather was deadly. The road was impassable. But he had taken an oath. He packed his medical bag and followed Thomas up the mountain. They arrived at dawn. Dr. Harrison entered the cabin and found Sarah barely conscious, her skin the color of ash, blood soaking through the sheets beneath her. The smell of death already hung in the room. He examined her quickly. The baby was in distress. Sarah's pulse was barely detectable. He had minutes, not hours. I need to perform a surgical delivery, he told the family. Here, now, or they both die. Douglas stepped forward. God will decide. God gave me hands and knowledge. Let me use them. The standoff lasted precious seconds. Finally, Mary spoke. Save my daughter. Dr. Harrison worked with makeshift tools in a cabin lit by kerosene lamps. He had no anesthesia, no sterile environment, no proper equipment. But he had skill and desperation. He cut into Sarah's abdomen while the women held her down. She was too weak to scream. The baby emerged silent and blue. A girl. Dr. Harrison cleared her airways and she gasped, then wailed. But the sound wasn't quite right. It was weak, raspy, the cry of something not fully formed. He handed the baby to Mary and turned back to Sarah. She was hemorrhaging badly. He worked frantically to stop the bleeding, but her body had nothing left to give. Her blood was thin, watery, unable to clot properly. Her organs, already failing, simply gave up. Sarah Hutchkins died at sunrise on January 16, 1968. She was 17 years old. She had been married for 7 months. She had been dying since the day she was born. The baby, named Grace, survived. But survival is a relative term. Dr. Harrison stayed long enough to examine the infant. What he found filled him with deep, terrible sadness. Grace had a cleft palate so severe her face was split nearly in 2. Her spine curved in a way that would never allow her to stand straight. Her heart had holes in it, defects that would eventually kill her. One of her arms ended at the elbow, the hand never having formed. Her legs were different lengths. She was the physical manifestation of what happens when a family tree becomes a family circle. She won't live long, Dr. Harrison told Mary quietly. Maybe a year, maybe less. Her heart, there's nothing that can be done. Mary held her granddaughter, this broken thing born from generations of broken choices. How many more? She asked. How many more? What? How many more of us have to die before it stops? Dr. Harrison looked at the family gathered in the cabin. He saw webbed fingers and crossed eyes and bent spines and missing teeth. He saw intelligence dimmed by genetic damage and bodies twisted by recessive genes given too many chances to express themselves. All of you, he said quietly, if you continue this way. All of you. At Sarah's funeral, 40 Hutchins family members stood in the snow around a grave dug into frozen ground. Thomas held baby Grace, who whimpered in the cold. The family sang a hymn, their voices carrying through the valley. Douglas spoke at the graveside. He talked about Sarah's devotion, her kindness, her acceptance of God's will. He didn't mention that she had been a child bride, married to her cousin, dead before her 18th birthday. He didn't mention the generations of sickness and death that had led to this moment. As they lowered Sarah's coffin into the ground, I want you to do something for me right now. Type in the comments, Sarah deserved better than this. If you truly understand the tragedy of what happened here, let those words be spoken. Let her death mean something. Grace Hutchins lived for 8 months. Long enough for the family to love her despite everything. Long enough for her to smile, though her malformed face made it look like a grimace. Long enough for her to reach for things with her one complete hand. Long enough to break their hearts when she died. She stopped breathing on September 3, 1968. Mary found her in the morning, cold in her crib. Another Hutchins buried in the family cemetery. Another name on a stone that would weather and fade like all the others. But Grace's death marked a turning point. Not because the family suddenly understood genetics or recognized the harm they had been doing to themselves for generations. They didn't. But because Dr. Harrison refused to let it end quietly. He filed a report with the Kentucky State Health Department. He documented everything. The family structure, the generations of intermarriage, the children born with defects, the women who died young, the shortened lifespans, the physical and mental impairments. In November 1968, a team of doctors and social workers arrived in Harlan County. They came with court orders and medical authority. They came to examine the Hutchins family and to understand the full scope of what had been happening in these mountains. The study took 3 months. 43 family members were examined. Blood was drawn. Genetic histories were documented. Physical examinations revealed the extent of the damage. The findings were catastrophic. Of the 43 family members, 38 showed signs of genetic disorders. 12 had significant physical deformities. 8 had measurable cognitive impairments. The average lifespan of a Hutchins family member was 47 years, compared to the national average of 70. The coefficient of inbreeding, a measure of how much genetic material is shared due to common ancestry, was calculated at 0.25 for the youngest generation. That's the equivalent of being born from a union between full siblings. The geneticists traced the family tree back 5 generations. They found that many individuals appeared multiple times in the ancestry of the children. Great-grandfather Elijah appeared 32 times in 8-year-old Jacob Hutchins's family tree, where he should have appeared only once. The family tree didn't just collapse. It imploded. Dr. Harrison presented the findings to Douglas and the family elders in March 1969. He brought charts and diagrams, medical terminology and genetic science. He showed them photographs of their own children, highlighting the physical markers of inbreeding. "This is what you've done," Dr. Harrison said, his voice heavy with frustration and sadness. "Generation after generation, you've concentrated harmful genes. Every child born into this family carries an increasing burden of genetic damage. Sarah died because her body was so compromised it couldn't sustain a pregnancy. Grace died because she inherited fatal defects from both parents. This isn't God's will. This is the mathematical certainty of genetics." Douglas stared at the papers spread before him. His hands, twisted with early-onset arthritis at 53, trembled slightly. "We were keeping the family pure. You were destroying it. Pure bloodlines aren't stronger. They're weaker. Diversity in genetics creates resilience. What you've created is fragility. Every child you produce is more vulnerable than the last." Mary spoke up, her voice breaking. "Can it be fixed?" Dr. Harrison hesitated. "Not for those already born. The genetic damage is permanent. But if the family stops marrying within itself, if you seek partners from outside, the next generation could be healthier. It would take several generations to fully recover, but it's possible. And if we don't change, asked William, Douglas's brother, in 3 generations, there won't be any Hutchkins family left. The genetic load is too heavy. The children will die younger and younger. The defects will become more severe. The family will end. The room fell silent. Outside, wind howled through the valley, carrying snow and the ghosts of all the children who had died too young. The meeting ended without resolution. The elders said they needed to pray on it. They needed to consult the family traditions, the teachings of great-grandfather Elijah. They needed time. But time was something they didn't have. 2 months later, in May 1969, 15-year-old Emma Hutchkins, Sarah's younger sister, was told she would marry her first cousin that summer. The cycle was continuing. Dr. Harrison heard about it through his contacts with the social workers. He drove up to the Hutchkins compound, determined to stop it. He found Emma in the garden planting vegetables with hands that shook from a neurological condition she had been born with. "Emma," he said gently, "you don't have to do this." She looked at him with eyes that held more understanding than he expected. "What choice do I have?" "You can leave. There are programs that can help you. Education, job training, housing. And be alone, away from everyone I've ever known. Alone and alive, or here and dead by 30. Emma pulled a weed from the soil. Her sister had been dead for over a year. Her niece had lived 8 months. She had watched her mother bury 6 children. She had seen the pattern, even if she couldn't name it. "Sarah told me something before she died," Emma said quietly. She said she felt like she was drowning from the inside, like her body was fighting itself. "Is that what will happen to me?" "Yes," Dr. Harrison said, refusing to lie. "If you marry your cousin and have children, yes. Your body is already compromised. Pregnancy could kill you." Emma nodded slowly. She made her decision in that moment, in a garden on a mountainside with dirt under her fingernails and fear in her heart. She left with Dr. Harrison that day. Just walked away from the only life she had ever known. Douglas tried to stop her, but she was 15 and terrified and determined. The state backed her decision. She became the first Hutchkins to voluntarily leave the family. Her departure sent shockwaves through the compound. If one could leave, others might follow. The foundation of the family structure, built on isolation and control, began to crack. By 1975, the Hutchkins family compound was half empty. 12 family members had left, seeking lives outside the mountains. They took their damaged genes with them, carrying the legacy of generations of inbreeding into the wider world. Emma married a man she met in Lexington. Not a cousin, not a relative at all. Their first child, born in 1973, was healthy. No defects, no deformities, no genetic time bombs ticking in her cells. Emma cried when the doctor told her. She hadn't known it was possible to create life without creating suffering. But back in the mountains, those who remained continued the old ways. Douglas's youngest daughter married her second cousin in 1972. She died in childbirth in 1974, her body unable to sustain the pregnancy. The baby, a boy, lived for 3 days. Thomas Hutchkins, Sarah's widower, never remarried. He lived alone in the cabin where his bride had died, growing old before his time. By 40, he looked 70. His teeth were gone, his spine curved. His mind began to slip, memories dissolving in the fog of early-onset dementia caused by genetic factors. Dr. Harrison retired in 1978. Before he left Harlan County, he compiled a final report on the Hutchkins family. It became a landmark case study in medical genetics, published in journals and cited in textbooks. The family that had hidden in the mountains for generations became infamous in scientific circles as an example of the catastrophic effects of sustained inbreeding. The report detailed everything. The family structure that folded in on itself. The generations of cousin marriages. The children born with increasingly severe defects. The women who died young. The men who deteriorated early. It showed in cold scientific terms what happens when genetic diversity disappears. It also showed something else. The resilience of those who left. Emma's children were healthy. So were the children of others who had broken free and married outsiders. Within a single generation, the genetic burden lifted. The family tree, allowed to branch outward again, produced stronger limbs. By 1985, only 17 Hutchkins remained in the compound. The youngest was 42. No children had been born there in 8 years. The family, in its original form, was dying out exactly as Dr. Harrison had predicted. Douglas Hutchkins died in 1987 at 69, which was old by family standards. His funeral was attended by 23 people, 12 of them Hutchkins who had left and returned to say goodbye. They stood on opposite sides of the grave, those who had stayed and those who had escaped. Mary, Douglas's widow and Sarah's mother, spoke at the graveside. She was 71, ancient by Hutchkins' standards, her survival an anomaly. Her voice, weathered by years and grief, carried across the cemetery. "We thought we were preserving something sacred," she said. "We thought keeping the blood pure would keep us strong. We were wrong. We poisoned ourselves with our own pride. We killed our children with our traditions." Sarah was 17 when she died. Grace was 8 months. How many more names are on these stones who never got to live? She paused, looking at the graves surrounding them. 46 markers. 46 Hutchkins who had died too young. Their lives cut short by genetic damage accumulated over generations. "I have a granddaughter," Mary continued, looking at Emma, who stood with her husband and 3 healthy children. "She left us. We called her a traitor. But her children are alive and whole and strong. Maybe she wasn't the traitor. Maybe we were traitors to our own blood when we kept it too close." The compound was abandoned in 1992. The cabins, weathered by time and neglect, slowly collapsed. Nature reclaimed the clearings. The family cemetery remained, but even the stones began to sink into the earth, the names fading. The Hutchkins family story became a cautionary tale told in genetics classrooms and medical schools. Professors showed slides of the family tree, that impossible tangle of lines doubling back on themselves. They explained coefficients of inbreeding and genetic load and recessive lethal alleles. But the academic language couldn't capture the real tragedy. Sarah dying at 17 with a baby she couldn't carry. Grace, born so broken she never had a chance. Emma, forced to choose between family and survival. The generations of children buried in the mountain soil, their lives sacrificed to a tradition that killed them. In 2010, a journalist tried to find surviving Hutchkins family members for a documentary. She located Emma, then 62 and living in Louisville. Emma agreed to an interview. "Do you ever regret leaving?" the journalist asked. Emma looked at her grandchildren playing in the yard. Healthy, bright-eyed, unburdened by the genetic legacy that had nearly destroyed her lineage. "I regret that I was the only one of my siblings to survive long enough to leave," she said. "I regret that Sarah never got the chance. I regret that my mother buried 6 children and believed it was God's will when it was just genetics. I regret that it took us 100 years to understand what we were doing to ourselves. But leaving itself, that wasn't regret. That was survival." The documentary never aired. The footage was too disturbing. The story too dark. But copies circulated in academic circles, another data point in the study of isolated populations and inbreeding depression. Today the Hutchkins compound is gone. The cabins rotted away. The cemetery is overgrown. The graves marked only by sunken depressions in the earth. The family scattered. Those who survived, their damaged genes slowly diluting in the wider population. But the legacy remains. Written in medical journals and genetic databases. The Hutchkins family. A case study in what happens when isolation becomes extinction. When tradition becomes tragedy. When the desire to preserve purity creates only death. Sarah Hutchkins died at 17. her body poisoned by her own ancestry, unable to sustain the life growing inside her. She was buried in a dress that smelled of mothballs, in a valley where fog still clings to the mountains, in soil that holds the bones of 46 others who died too young. Her stone, if you could find it now beneath the weeds and weather, reads simply, Sarah Hutchkins, 1950 to 1968, beloved daughter and wife. It doesn't mention that she was a child bride. It doesn't mention that her husband was her cousin. It doesn't mention that she died because generations of her ancestors made choices that concentrated fatal genes in her body. It doesn't mention that she never had a choice at all. The body kept dying even after the wedding because it had been dying long before. From the moment of conception, carrying the weight of 100 years of closed bloodlines and folded family trees. If you've watched this story until the end, you've witnessed one of the darkest chapters of American family history. If you're not subscribed yet, click that button now because these are the stories that need to be told. The ones that reveal the truth hiding in isolated places. If you watched until here, leave a comment saying, I watched until here. So I can know you and recognize who truly appreciates these stories. Hit that like button. If this story impacted you, share this video because Sarah's story and the stories of all the Hutchkins who died too young deserve to be remembered. They deserve to be the lesson that prevents this from happening again. Their tragedy is our warning. Their DNA, damaged beyond repair, is our evidence. Their graves sinking into the Appalachian soil are our reminder that some traditions don't preserve life. They destroy it.